Welcome to Weekly Reddit. In today's episode of r/ProRevenge, I unleashed the monster of bureaucracy upon my neighbor and watched it destroy him. How I got our translator fired. I unleashed the monster of bureaucracy upon my neighbor and watched it destroy him. This is a story of how patience is key, and how letting someone else get revenge for you is by far easier than doing it yourself. The setup. I live in one of those doubled-up houses where they build two houses adjacent to Yakatha with mirrored layout, so we share a wall but are otherwise completely separate. For years, the house next to me belonged to a nice old lady who you never really noticed or had any trouble with. When she died and the house was resold, the troubles began. The target is someone who I will refer to as Jack Sparrow, for reasons that will become clear later. Jack owns a sizable construction business, does some real estate on the side. He buys the house and rents it to a bunch of foreign construction workers that work for his business. I say foreign because it is relevant to the story. There are rumors Jack is doing some shady stuff to have these work for him dirt cheap, by claiming that they're national workers in their native country, and paying them according to that wage, and not the much higher minimum wage of my country. Not exactly on the up and up. Possibly unreported labor as well. Anyways, he stuffs 4 to 6 of these in said house for them to live while they work here. Now I do not have anything against construction workers, or foreigners. But these guys have two traits that are very problematic. They are extremely loud and they do not give a fuck about anyone else. We're talking non-stop music and partying starting Thursday evening throughout the entire weekend, until they leave at 5 AM Monday morning to go to work. Seriously, I don't know how or when they sleep, it is literally non-stop. We're talking I'm wearing headphones but still cannot hear my own sound over their music loud, since it would appear that they've designated the living room, adjacent to the shared wall, as the party room where the fun happens. At first, I do the neighborly thing and just suck it up, thinking it's just one party, just one weekend. After the third one in a row, I go over to ask them to turn it down, since night disturbance. It's technically illegal to blast music this loud, hearable on the street and across the street by my other neighbors who have also complained. I'm met with a half-hearted "so sorry, we'll fix." Except nothing changes. I go over several more times, each time angrier, each time met with "but it's not loud. If I can hear your music in my own house, over my own TV and music, I would say that it is in fact too loud." I contact Jack, since he is their landlord, and explain the situation, after which I'm met with an abrupt "sorry, not my fucking problem." Basically Jack told me to get fucked. So I involve police, and call them every time things get out of hand. After about a dozen calls, sometimes even twice in the same night, it is clear that even regular police interference doesn't help the situation. I should mention that I am a lawyer, so I know what the next legal steps are. I also know that other than a token paper from a judge saying their music is too loud, I'm not really going to get anything. Things would, like they already sometimes had, become a cat and mouse game where they would blast their music extremely loud to piss me off or to wake me up for a few brief moments, so that by the time I could get proof or police show up, there would be no music. I'm deadlocked with my only further option being pretty useless and a waste of time. At this point I'm biding my time and just waiting till something changes. I'm not saying that I condone people who bludgeon their neighbor to death with a rusty pipe, but I do somewhat understand what would drive someone to that point. The mistake. One day I'm at home and I notice quite a lot of ruckus next door, more so than usual. Suddenly, I see through my garden window that a wall is being partially torn down. You see, sometime over the years, the neighbors had built a small adjacent side building adjoining the main house. It was right on the border between us, and when the gardens were being refenced, the wall was used as a divider to save on fencing. Said wall was now in the process of having its top part ripped off by a crane. I was not informed of any of this, which, while not technically needed, would have been the nice thing to do. I go take a walk so I can take a look at what we're doing and see that they've torn down the entire side building. The remaining wall between our gardens is the only part that has been kept intact, and even then, not the top part. Being a lawyer, and specifically, a construction permit lawyer, I know two things. Shit like this is not allowed without a pre-approved permit from the city. There is no way in hell they have said permit, as I would have seen the application for it. I regularly check to see what permits are being applied to around my area, just so I can keep up with what is being built or requested in my area. This is it. The moment I have been waiting for, the situation has changed and the time has come to exact revenge. A quick email sent to the municipal authorities lets me do my civic duty of reporting a potential crime, the fact that someone is building or demolishing shit without a permit. Since this is a simple report, no response happens since I'm not an official victim or anything yet. Since no further construction happens for a few days and everything was removed, I assume that was that, and they would only tear down the side structure since it was starting to fall apart due to age. Neighbors have moved all their stuff that was in said building onto their lawn and haphazardly covered it with a tarp. The next week, more construction materials are being delivered and construction starts. I send a new email to city services, with new pictures, saying that apparently, there is more planned, and that I hope they undertake the appropriate action. Instant response less than an hour later. They'd called Jack after the first time to inform him that what he was doing required a permit, and he had ensured them that he didn't know that. BS. He's in construction. Of course he knows, and that he would stop construction and request a permit. They called him again after my email, reprimanded him for not following his earlier promise, and he said again he would shut it down. I happened to be working from home that day, and had to stop myself from waving to the construction crew as they left. Later that day I get an angry phone call from Jack, who accuses me of reporting him and that I would be sorry. He would come after me for damages for his delays. I respectfully inform him that even if I reported him, reports are in my name, but not published and anonymized in later files. I wouldn't have done anything wrong, because from the looks of it he didn't have a permit and should have known that before he started working illegally without one. I end the call before I start to sound too happy with things. Jack has at this point no idea what I have initiated with this. He is Jack Sparrow and I have just rung the bell that awakens the kraken that will destroy him. He just doesn't know it yet. The kraken. You see, there is a good reason why most people consult an expert and/or a lawyer when they want to apply for a permit. The rules involved are so convoluted and needlessly complex that navigating them as a non-professional is extremely hard and time-consuming, and a single mistake can torpedo your entire case, forcing you to do it all over. I have killed entire projects, and have seen clients' projects killed, by pointing out that on page 127, section 35(1)(a), something was left blank that should have been answered. I did some digging and found out that the previous owners of the houses had actually consulted the Akatha about the side building, and agreed on making the wall part of the divider between their gardens. So much so, that they shared the costs of it. And the ownership. That wall that he destroyed part of? It was also my wall. Which of course, means I'm entitled to damages, but that is not the important part. The important part is that he needs my permission to do anything to that wall. So when he applied for a permit a few weeks later, added bonus, rowdy neighbors stuff is still out in the open, covered by just a tarp, since they expected this to be a quick smash and replace job that would take a few weeks at most. I went to city center and looked at the application. Noticed that they were planning to do some stuff to said wall that I own 50%. So I filed a complaint, following proper procedure, about the permit, namely that even if granted, It could never be executed, since Jack needed permission from me in regards to the wall, and he didn't have it, nor was I intending to grant it. This should kill his permit, since permits cannot be granted if you know in advance they cannot be realized. No sense granting a permit to build a certain kind of house when you know they're never actually going to build it. Now, Jack was a bit of a smooth talker, and as a construction entrepreneur, had his connections, and permits are a political decision here just as much as a legal one. So despite a 100% correct legal objection that should have killed his permit, it went through. He actually called me about it to gloat a little. No worry, one can appeal a permit in my country. The only requirement is that you pay a €100 fee, which I gladly paid. The appeal instance is a subnational instance, and does not care one bit about Jack's political ties or the half-hearted bullshit that the city officials wrote to justify granting the permit in spite of the concerns I raised. They terminate his permit without any hesitation on the aforementioned legal grounds. Jack sees his permit blocked until he fixes the issue, which he can't, because I'm not really inclined to agree with his plans for our wall, you see. At this point, going through 2 lengthy procedures, it has been over 7 months. The neighbors have had an unfinished construction project in their yard the entire time, forced to store their stuff elsewhere, something that was always supposed to be a temporary thing for a few weeks while we build turned into something that was taking months, with no end in sight. But wait, there's more. The above was the administrative part of the matter, him getting the permit. Now doing construction work without a permit is also a criminal offense. And of course, my report got passed around to the appropriate instances, so now Jack was also the subject of a criminal procedure for construction offense. Not only did he risk fines and jail time, he was a construction business and used his own construction business for the work he did on the property. So his company was also on the hook. And one of the sentences that can be given in these types of crimes is to be prohibited to do construction or construction-related activity as a business, either permanently or temporarily. Not only was he personally on the line, his entire business was as well. During this debacle, Jack tried to sell the property. This didn't really go too well because of a few reasons. 1. The property was inflicted with an illegal situation. The demolished side building was torn down illegally, and until said illegal status was resolved, it would stick to the property. Which tends to kill the property value quite a bit, since nobody wants to buy something that they'll have to spend time and money on to make legal again by either rebuilding the torn down building, or getting a regularization permit for it. Made even worse by the fact that he applied for said permit and had it denied, so he couldn't even claim that said permit would be super easy to get. Secondly, is Jack never intended to sell the property in its current state. What he, as I now know, has done in the past is buy cheap old houses like the one next to me. He puts some of his crew in it, who can't complain about the subpar accommodation. They thrash the place because they don't care and he lets them, then when the place is done, he tears it down and sells it to a developer or develops it himself. However, due to his construction crime and the accompanying status for the property, step 2 was not an option. He couldn't renovate it the way it needed to be. Small renovations would not be enough, because covering the crime was always a requirement in any permit he would request for the building, and because of me, he couldn't cover it. Couldn't sell it either, because the place was trashed, and any developer looking at it would dip out when they realized there was a construction issue and a vocal neighbor who would oppose anything big that they would try to do there. Lost of easier properties to develop than that one. In conclusion. Anyway, that is where we are today. Jack is staring down the barrel of a criminal court procedure that is about to happen where he is risking his business and livelihood. His existing projects also gather special attention from city services now, since he is now outed to them as someone who cuts corners on permits and regulations. He cannot really sell the property unless he cuts a massive loss, since in its current state it is absolutely trashed. He cannot develop it or sell to a developer because all development plans involve the adjoining wall, which he cannot use in big ways unless he gets my permission. The rowdy neighbors are stuck living in a smaller house than what they had, in a place they trashed but that cannot really be renovated or fixed in the major way that it needs. They have quieted down a lot, possibly because Jack blames them for his current situation, which isn't wrong, I suppose. I have awakened the Kraken and set it off on Jack Sparrow, and it utterly ruined him. And the best part is that I had do very little to do it. All I really did was nudge the abomination that is municipal bureaucracy and point it in his direction, and they did the rest. I could tell you that he called me to complain and even beg about letting him use the wall the way he needs it to, so that he can get on with his business and fix the issues and use them to show his good faith in court in the criminal procedure, that he was losing money and customers over this and was in danger of losing his entire business, and that I then smugly replied with not my fucking problem. But he didn't. So for now we'll just have to imagine that he did. How I got our translator fired. I was working a job that had me operating in our offices overseas. We would have business expenses, and those receipts would be in the language of the country we were in obviously. Those expenses were for things like printer ink, office equipment, cleaning services, marketing costs, all pretty standard stuff. Well, around this time we got a new VP over our region who worked out of head office in LA. This VP came up with this brilliant idea to hire a translator to translate all of receipts to make sure we weren't sneaking in bullshit. Fair enough. However, the issue that arose was that we had to send our expenses to the translator who would translate the receipt then submit for reimbursement. The problem was this translator was a real Karen type. She would demand better scans of the receipts, oftentimes after we had already thrown it away. She would argue if we really got the best deal on whatever we bought. I remember in one transaction on about $200 of ink cartridges she asked me why I didn't order online from this common website. To which I said they were out of stock at the time, and we needed the ink so we bought from the local store. To which she said I was spending too much money. To which I said it's none of your concern, your job is to translate the receipt. To which she said if I want her to submit my expenses I need to be nice to her. To which I said she needs to learn her place, she's a translator not a VP that gets to instruct me what to do. After this encounter she started being extra anal with my expenses, so one day I came in the office early to call her and try and work things out. She basically told me that I screwed up by pissing her off, and she expected my expense reports to be perfect or she wouldn't submit them unless they were. I told her if she keeps this up she won't have a job much longer. She laughed and wished me well and hung up. A few months later we had our annual meeting in LA, and after the meeting we were at a bar and I walked up to our VP and started up a conversation. I steered the conversation to expenses and I asked him how much in monthly expenses did he typically reimburse us for in the country we worked out of. He said about $3,000 to $4,000. I acted surprised and asked, is that all? He goes, yay. To clarify, that $3,000 to $4,000 is the typical spend, and he says yay, it rarely gets above $4,000. So I ask him about how Karen our translator is doing. He says she's doing a good job and I nod my head and I go, how much fraudulent expenses has she caught? It's important to note, every employee that was submitting expenses was well paid. They'd be awfully stupid trying to skim some extra dollars via fraudulent expense reports. He goes, what do you mean? I said, well, you hired her to ensure all the expenses you were reimbursing us for are legitimate, right? Her job is to translate them for you, correct? He says it is, and I ask, so is it safe to presume you've done that to ensure people aren't submitting BS expenses? He says you could say that. I smile and ask, so how much in fraudulent expenses has she caught? He thinks for a moment and goes, I don't think she has caught any. So I ask, and how much do we pay her? He says it depends on her workload, but between $2,500 to $3,000 a month. I smile and ask, does it make sense to pay someone $3,000 a month to translate $3,000 in receipts? Well, she ensures we aren't getting fraudulent expenses, and I counter, well, you said she hasn't counted any in the last 9 months, and the expenses are always between $3,000 to $4,000, so as long as the expenses stay in that range, wouldn't it be safe to assume that the expenses are legitimate? And couldn't you bring on a translator on a contract basis if they get out of hand? He sees my point. And imagine the cost savings, we would probably save over $40,000 a year. That's a good chunk of change, isn't it? The VP tries to defend his position, but she does a good job, and I counter, but you could frame this as you've saved us $40,000 a year and created a baseline to judge expenses by. Cutting costs is always good for the bottom line and the end of the year bonuses, isn't it? FYI, I knew that a major percent of the VP comp package with the company had to do with the company's margin at the end of the year. The bigger the margin, the bigger the bonus. You can see the twinkle in his eye. We carry on the rest of the night. A few weeks later we get an email from the VP saying that we submit to all our expenses directly to the admin for reimbursement and that we have let go of Karen. FYI, Karen wasn't her real name, obviously. Too long did not read, got my translator fired for being difficult by getting the VP to see she was a waste of money.
Don't forget to subscribe so you can stay up with the best content from Reddit.